Thank you so much for being here today. We were asked to videotape today memories that we have of our time together here at Little River. So we're going to start by introducing each other, and if you could start with the year that you joined along with your name, that'd be great.
I'm Lois Wyatt, and I believe it was 1980, very thereabouts, plus or minus.
My name's Rich Dodenhoff, and I think I joined around 2003, 2004.
Bruce Douglas. My wife and I joined together in 1993.
Bunny Jones. We moved here from Billings, Montana, and joined the church in 1959 when it was in meeting. The last few meetings were in the Annandale preschool.
Barbara Lowrey. I joined in 1984.
Dorothy Lamb. I joined in 1964.
Thank you so much. I'm Karen Flann. I joined in 2017, pretty new. So I'd like to start off today with you, Bunny, because you were the first of this group that became part of the church. When you joined, it was the Congregational Church, as I recall.
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit about what it was like then when you were meeting elsewhere?
Well, when we first came here, we came here from Billings, Montana, and the church was meeting in the Annandale School. And one of the interesting things there was, of course, it was in a school and in one of the big rooms in Annandale School. And we wanted to make sure that everybody was welcome. And so they put all of the black people up in front. And then the rest of us sat. We were all together, but they made sure that they were up there. One of the interesting things that the nursery for this church, when we moved in here, was downstairs. And so every weekend, I would come out and make sure that the cribs had clean sheets and that the toys were all clean and ready for them. But I can imagine that if now we put these kids downstairs, it would be very strange. Hugh Beckwith was hired around that time. He goes by Beck, and he was living in a parsonage off of Backlick Road. And then we had Vern Ahrens, and they lived on Chapel Road, and his wife Elizabeth, and she sang in the choir. And so.
Thank you so much, Bunny. The rest of us have all been here since this building was constructed, at least part of it was constructed. So I'd like to go ahead and share memories of your times here and look forward to hearing what your experience. Barbara, do you want to start?
Well, first of all, I wanted to follow up about the welcomingness. I came because my mother felt it was time for me to get my kids in Sunday school. And we came and we had a person who welcomed us right away. And my mother said, if they're that welcoming, this is the kind of place you want to be. I came from a congregational, it was, the UCC is pretty young. And so it had just become the UCC. So we were the Congregational Church. And I remember when we voted to change the name to Little River United Church of Christ. And unlike some congregations, it was not a big fight over whether we should maintain the congregational name. One of the significant things, too, is that one of the members of our church, one of the early members, I don't know if he was a founding member, was very active in the creation of the United Church of Christ. And so he went to meetings. Do you remember where Mr. Haas went for the meetings?
He went to all the meetings.
To help create the United Church of Christ.
You know, I think that even though I wasn't there, one of the interesting stories I heard about the early days of the church was from Janie Husfeld, who was a founding member. I asked her once what it was like, back in the late 50s and mid 50s. And she said, well, everybody was in their 20s and 30s. and we were just covered with little kids everywhere. But there was one couple that were about 60. And we thought, who are these old people? So things change.
Dottie, do you want to share some of your memories that you have from?
Well, Herb and I came down from New England. Both of us came from congregational churches. And Herb, working and being employed as an engineer, was immediately voted in on the trustees, and was also the chairman of the building committee that was responsible for building the educational wing. And really my first contact with the church after we joined was the Women's Fellowship. Mm-hmm. And I remember all the activities. We had a monthly meeting. Sometimes there'd be a program, sometimes a speaker, maybe a movie. And we did a lot of fundraising with potluck dinners, and we had Christmas craft bazaars, rummage sales. I remember working on the rummage sales, bake sales, and it was a great time with a lot of fellowship.
Early in my time here, Dottie was chair of FISH, for Immediate Sympathetic Help, and I listened to her annual appeal in September, and really felt, as a stay-at-home mom with young kids, I thought that's something I could participate in. She asked for telephone coordinators and drivers. So when I volunteered after one of those talks in the early 80s, she said, well, I don't need any phone captains. Would you be a driver? I said, no, I can't do that with my 2 preschool kids. I couldn't imagine a 2-year-old and waiting for this, whoever we took, in a doctor's office. So it was a few months before she then called me again and said, oh, there's an opening now, and yes, would you be a phone captain? So I served as a phone captain for several years, and then as the church rep after Dottie and Jaden Filkin took a brief stint, and later as the chair of the ecumenical board. So that kept me. Fish was very involved, kind of until I went back to work, and then the schedule didn't work anymore.
Yeah, that was one of the activities here that was to help support the community. When I joined, before I joined, there was a dinner here on a Friday night, and it was welcoming people from North Carolina, I believe, who had been members of this church, and they were hosted by the community here. And there was a wonderful dinner on Friday night. And I went to the dinner, and I just thought it was the most wonderful feeling to be there and be with all these people who were supporting each other. And the next day, the women who had come and the women here were going to a march on Washington. Yeah. So that was the night for me that I decided, yes, gotta go.
In a way, my coming to this church, I can sort of jokingly say, was an act of disloyalty. I had been a member of First Congregational in downtown DC for 15 years. I'd even been on the search committee that called John Mack, the late great, who was a wonderful senior pastor. I was a young carefree widower when I came, but eventually along the way I met the woman that I've been married to for almost 40 years now, and we started having all these children. And the crowd at First Church was quite small. We had 700 or 800 seats and typically 70 or 80 people in a Sunday service. And we moved out to Falls Church at some point, and we're commuting back, and we're having to park further and further from church. And finally, I went to John, and I said, John, I think I need to look at a suburban church. Will you let me do that? And he said, sure. And I'll give you a recommendation. He said, you will like Vern Aaron's. And the rest, as they say, is history. When we left, regrettably, we took 3/8 of First Church's Sunday school with us.
Well, I came here from the Presbyterian Church. I'd been attending church in D.C., moved down here from the New York City area. I never thought I would find a church that would be safe for LGBTQ people in the suburbs, and became disenchanted with the Presbyterian Church, and it's trying to decide whether or not to accept gay folks. And there used to be in the DC Gay newspaper, the Washington Blade, a page that listed churches that welcomed gay people. And in the middle of the page, they had a picture of a pastor from those churches. And for a few weeks, I saw this picture of this tall guy and this short woman, and it said it was this church in Annandale. And I thought, man, that's weird. So I decided to come out here. It was Vern and Jenna. And I decided to come out and check it out for myself. And the church was very welcoming. And I think after my first visit, I just kept coming here. And my first entry into the church was joining the choir. I was a member of the choir before I was a member of the church.
When I joined First Church in 1978, they were already open and affirming and had been so for quite a while. When I crossed the river to see what it was like out here in the burbs and was in a new members class, I asked, is this church O&A? And Vern looked almost a little embarrassed, and he said, we haven't got there yet. And one of our associate pastors said, and I'm not there yet myself. That almost gave me pause. But I decided I would take a chance anyway, and now here we are.
One of my fun memories is that we had bouncers come once we voted on O&A, and I have a wonderful picture with me as a bouncer. It was a national campaign that the UCC had to say that it was, open and affirming. You are welcome here, and you won't be bounced out.
I was wondering what the bouncer was.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Another early conflict in the church, this was very early, was over the Vietnam issue. And both Beck and Skip had expressed they had anti-Vietnam sentiments. Skip more so than Beck. And there were a couple of, I remember Skip held a couple of meetings at the church here that I attended, and he just talked more about his anti-Vietnam sentiment. And, probably people now coming to the church now don't realize that this was an issue in the early part of the church during the 60s, in addition to the civil rights issue. And I also understand that, and I have a couple of rather personal stories about this. I understand there was also some assistance by the pastors to help people get over the border into Canada. And also, I learned this quite a few years later, that one of the very top U.S. officials in Saigon before the fall of Saigon was a member of our church and one of our deacons.
One of the things I had written down here was the Horizon Day Camp that we had in the summertime. And that was for children who couldn't go to other camps, but they lived in this area, and it was a lot of fun to work with that. Another thing I think would be fun to know probably is that Joanne, who now has the Monday Bible class, she also cataloged all the books. She's a librarian, and I think that she was at downtown, the big library there, Library of Congress, yeah. And she had cataloged all of our books. So if you look on the back of the book, if you take it from the shelf out there, you will see the correct number, although they're not in correct order right now.
Thank you, Bunny. I'm wondering, I was listening to these stories, there have been ups and downs in discussions, big serious discussions, and I wonder, what is it that keeps you coming? You've been coming for years and years and years, so what is it about this church that keeps you all coming here?
Well, I know what keeps me coming. I come in here to fix the green plants out in the narthex every Sunday morning and talk to them and sometimes replace them. And that's been my job for years, and I just love it. I feel like it's home. It's home.
Yeah, for me, it's actually a fairly simple answer to that question. I haven't found anywhere else where I think I fit, frankly. I grew up in a Unitarian church, not particularly believing anything. And 77 years later, I still don't really particularly believe anything. But I have always, even though it was a Unitarian church, it was a New England Unitarian church, so Jesus was there. And we heard about him a lot. And I've always thought that he was a pretty good guide for how one should live a life. So I've long considered myself really more of a Jesusist than a Christian. Theology to me is always kind of hocus pocus, but leading a good life has always been something that I've wished I could do and always endeavor to do, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so much, but this is the place for me.
Well, what keeps you coming, in my case, yes, I was raised in a congregational church too, in Providence, Rhode Island. Very magnificent 1890s building that has this magnificent interior, not congregational style at all. So coming here was a bit of an adjustment, but I have to say, well, when Skip visited and said, well, I don't know then if you, the fancy church, I said, well, I love wood grain. He said, okay. But what keeps me, I tried a little bit, as I think most of us would, tried a few things out as a young adult because I got a little, actually I kind of got obsessed with perfect attendance. And then kind of felt too trapped, if you will, and so really needed a break. And then in my 20s, had no particular compelling reason to find a church, but did try a little bit. I mean, I went to an Episcopal church and felt lost because I can't follow the liturgy at all, and visited a Methodist church and thought, boy, that sermon doesn't really hold water. I only heard one, so not a fair judgment, but I wasn't impressed. So kind of, I don't know whether the congregational church shaped me or I, more, or I somehow have some values aside, but yes, this is the best fit, I think, of any that I'm familiar with. And so, yes, that's what keeps me coming.
I think for me, it's the sense of community and I don't want to say family. Families get messy. and sometimes you become estranged from family. So yeah, I'd say community more, and a common sense of purpose and drive. This church always seems to be on the right side of history and doing things that are important to me. I got married in this church, and I don't know that there are many other churches where that could have happened. So yeah.
Before I came here, I was Methodist, and well, for quite a long time. And at the same time, I was singing in a community choir that's inclusive, and my church wasn't. And I waited a long time for my church to decide if it would like to be inclusive and like to let people get married who wanted to get married. But then I decided I was too old to wait for it, so I decided to start looking for a different place, and that's how I find myself here. So there are a lot of different ways that we end up coming and different reasons why we end up staying. Yeah.
My journey to the UCC started in the public library. My first job out of graduate school was in Northern California. And I knew nobody, and I figured, well, I'm not that religious, but maybe if I went to church, I'd meet people. So I looked in the yellow pages for the local Unitarian church, and there wasn't one. So I said, okay, what's the second least objectionable? And I went to the library and got a book on American churches. And after half an hour, I said, well, I think I'll try this UCC place. And I love coincidences. And after I'd been there a few months, and the pastor said, wouldn't you please like to join? And it turned out the day he picked for me was my 30th birthday. So.
I think I grew up in a congregational church, and we had a preacher that was just so powerful that it influenced me, and it was a church that appealed to a lot of college professors as well. It was founded about the same time as Little River, as a matter of fact. But I think I agree with what Rich is saying of community and friendship, but I find that my mind feels comfortable here too. I'm not having to jettison my thinking when I come here, and I think the preaching has been a big part of at least my staying, and I know people valued Vern Aarons' sermons a lot, and we are now grateful to have a new pastor who stimulates us the same way. The other thing that I think is nice about a church is it is intergenerational. And if you're busy with your career, you're basically dealing with people your own age. And so to be able to come to church where there are older people, at the time we're older people, and young people both, and seeing our youth sing and participate and play the instruments keeps you, it's somewhat young in a way that you're aware of what's happening.
I think we have to keep redefining what young adult is. I'd say anyone under 50 now.
That's right.
When I first started at First Church downtown, I was there about 2 or 3 Sundays, and the pastor started giving the announcements, and they needed to recruit a couple people to go to some young adult thing. And so I start sliding down. Oh, geez. But then I found out to qualify, you had to be under 30, and I'd already passed that bridge. Thank goodness.
I think the best the best word that I could describe when I walk into this church is relief. I know that, and I've been here a long time, and so I have a great many friends. Thank you to all of you. But when I walk in here, I just feel that there are people that share the same values that I do. And that's, relief is the best way I can describe it. And it just blocks out everything that's, we're all brainwashed with all this media that's going on. But when I walk into the church, I just feel secure. Maybe that's another word.
Yeah, more so than now, right in our current environment than in the past. Wow.
Yeah, I
Yes.
can't remember why, but for some reason I had to be here the day after the election. And I walked into Shelley's office, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and words were not required.
Well, back to Barbara's comment about across generations, mix of. That's one thing I value most about my decade or so with Fish, was that I, as a young mom, got to know some of the then elderly folks who were participating in all the other days of the week that we covered a whole week back then in our rotation, and got to know Lucia Whittemore, who was just so wonderful, fantastic sense of humor, and Gladys Baker, and some others. But it was a real privilege to have a connection to the folks, to feel that connection when it just wasn't exactly my age peers. And another thing I valued about Fish was that it gave me an opportunity to really interact ecumenically too. And I truly came to appreciate some of the Catholic members and their strong commitment. They were few in number compared to the size of their congregations, but those that I got to interact with were very committed. And I really appreciated that broadening of my horizons.
Lois, could you speak about the Welcome Center that you...
Okay, that's a little, bringing us a little more to current times, or not quite current, but certainly more into this century anyway. For the 50th anniversary, Vern wanted a kind of signature project. And I recall clearly the evening that Bobby Fuller called me, and she said, well, do you have any idea? She was part of the committee. I think it was 4 people. She and her husband, and I believe it was Becky Serby and her husband, were part of the looking for ideas to satisfy Vern's desire. So she said, do you have any ideas? And I said, oh, no, I really didn't. I mean, I didn't have a focus. But she was so good in that we just talked for a while. And as we talked for about 15 or 20 minutes, this idea tumbled out that I didn't even know I've had it in the back of my head, but I never imagined the where and when it might come to fruition. And that is, I'd been teaching adult ESL for quite some time by then. And I was at that time in both Fairfax County Adult Ed and Nova across the street. And I said, well, students sit in classrooms and their teacher has a certain curriculum that she's supposed to cover. And but I think what they could really benefit from is just conversation with everyday, not specifically with a class-driven agenda, and just talk to other adults. And there were a couple other ideas proposed, and so the annual meeting, I believe 3 ideas were discussed, and my idea was approved, and I was really taken aback because it had just come out of almost nothing. That I didn't even know it was there, and Bobby Fuller pulled it out of me, and then it got approved. Well, it was a big project because we had built that addition in a few years prior, actually quite a few years prior, and left the basement level unfinished. So there was a need to really have find a
Capital campaign.
Yes, that's what it came to, as a capital campaign for money to make that happen. And this was all to be part of this signature 50th anniversary. And it was complicated. Oh my goodness, it was complicated. There were so many hurdles, and the trustees had to get through it. And it took a lot longer to actually open than anybody imagined, I think, when we started down that road. But the money was found, it came forth, I should say, not just was, not passive. People actively contributed. And the trustees were committed to seeing it through until, it just got complicated. But eventually we opened, and for a while, I, as the connection between Nova and Vern had said, oh, I think that's a good idea because I've always thought we should have a connection, more of an involvement with Nova because of the location of the two. And so we had some volunteers. I thought the volunteers would kind of be scattered. Come occasionally. But oh my goodness, no, we didn't have a lot, but those who came every single week. And the idea was to have some games and refreshments and simple conversation, just friendly conversation. So it went on for, I can't remember exactly, maybe 8 or 9 years, but the nature of the program across at Nova changed a bit in terms of the people who were as our students, and I retired and the connection got lost. So,
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know another program that was here when I joined was the First Fridays, and I think that was quite successful. I don't think I ever attended. Would anybody have experience about that?
Yeah, I was on the kitchen crew. That was probably after the choir, the next thing that I got involved in. And there were a lot of people who helped out with that. It really drew in a lot of kids from the church and from the nursery school, the preschool. And there were some nights where we served 70 to 90 people dinner and had a great time doing it. There was a lot of fun in the kitchen. I remember Jerry Serby and Don Wallace and Sam Dalton standing over the grill and sort of lightheartedly arguing when it was time to flip a pancake or not. So there was a lot of fun with that. And you were on the kitchen crew for a while, and Kathleen Stiles and Sue Leathers, Pam Binninger, I remember.
And Nancy Hunt, remember?
Yes. Nancy was there all the time. Sometimes Jenna helped out. Sometimes Vern and his wife were there as well. And then after we served the meal and cleaned up the kitchen, we would go out to dinner. And so that was fun. We had a good time doing that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I remember it when it started.
Oh, good.
Our kids were already sort of getting to the aging out of it when it started, but I think one of the ways they tried to sell the program to the public was you can drop off your kids and the parents can have a date.
That was the intention.
Yeah.
It never happened, not for us. Either one of our kids wouldn't go, or one of us would find out they needed someone to stay and help. But Carrie and I never had a date from a first Friday night. But I think our two kids who were involved in the church, our middle son decided long ago he was an atheist and refused to attend. But they enjoyed the program. But it was, I can't remember when it started, but it was quite a while ago.
I think, did Dee and
Cardiff.
Cardiff's, yeah.
Dee and Chuck Cardiff.
Yeah, and then when I came, it was
Mike
Was John running?
Mike Craven and Lowrey Jones were running it. And they had fabulous programs. I remember once they brought in raptors, so there were these hawks, and another time it was reptiles. There were snakes and lizards and turtles. So I stayed in the kitchen for that one. I was like,
First Friday was what prompted my grandson to start coming. I brought him as he was an only child at the time, and it was like, okay, here's a chance for him to socialize. Now he's 26, and I think he was 4, so we're talking some more than 20 years ago. But it was wonderful, and idea was the kids would be active. So we had crafts, and then we had time when they ran races in the social hall. And Brandon just fell in love, and he fell in love with Chuck Cardiff. So one in the fall, he said, "Grandma, can you take me to church?" Thinking it was going to be for First Friday.
First Friday repeated.
And I brought him, and when I went back to the Sunday school room, I said, "Well, his Sunday school, well, he's already in practicing with the choir," because the children's choir, and he fell in love with the children's choir. And when I came back from getting, I said, "It's fine for you. I'll get a cup of coffee." When I came back, he said, I'm joining the children's choir." So that led to Brandon's coming to this church, and it brought his family that were Lutheran. No, that's Brandon's church, and so they started coming here too.
One of the things about First Friday, I knew about the food part, but I never understood about what happened with the program. So it's nice.
And Jane Wallace,
Yes.
my goodness, she cut out little stuff to paste or glue. The amount of time that Jane Wallace devoted to preparing stuff for the kids to do. And it was amazing how much. And then, as I say, the Cardiffs were really smart about knowing about activities, so they were determined that each group had a time that would run races or do different kind of
They were
activities.
marvelous.
And then the eating, the food was another part of it. So that it was, the kids were active the whole time they were
Jane
here.
did multiple craft things for each age group. So it wasn't just one. She was doing, I think, 3 or 4.
Oh, yes. It was
She would come in with tubs and tubs of stuff.
And she's well prepared for helping us when we have the Halloween thing that I saw her hand again of cutting out all the stuff that the kids could paste.
I was going to mention about the choir because I had been singing in a choir, and when I first came, and there was an active choir then too, and I thought, well, how am I going to do this? Because I'm going to have to come at night. And I was living relatively close here, so I thought, that'll be fine. I can come at night and drive in and drive out. And so I just loved the choir, and I do miss it. And I was telling my granddaughter the other day, I don't know how we're talking about this, and she said, "Well, Grandma, you always sit in the same place when you go into the church." And I said, "Yes, I sit across from the choir and pretend I'm there because," but since I don't drive at night anymore, getting active in the choir, so I just enjoy it from the other side. So.
Well, I also wanted to find out if you have any specific memories, particularly about Pastor Vern when he was here. I don't know if there were sermons that he gave that stuck with you or experiences you had with him, because I know he was here a long time and he was definitely beloved.
I wish my memory could hold on to his sermons, because I was a history major. I wrote a lot of papers, but I could not, it just continued to amaze me how every single Sunday he produced something that to me was the equivalent of a paper I might have written in college, that just was so profound and varied and thoughtful. I am in awe. And again, I grew up in this church, in a church in Providence, had a lot of professors and the lawyers and doctors of Providence. So they had high expectations. And when the minister who was there a long time, and he retired, and he had printed kind of as his farewell, a book of his sermons, selected sermons, yes, but his sermons. So I asked Vern when he was, getting ready to leave, would he please do this, please? He was so dismissive, so modest. No, 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 nobody wants those. I thought, yes, I do. But I couldn't persuade him. Were there any I held on to? I only wish. I wish I could hold on to almost every single week for those 22 years.
I think one of the remarkable things about Vern was he was very patient with his congregation. He had places that he wanted us to go, but he knew that in many ways we couldn't go there quickly. And I can go back to the O&A thing as an example of that. We didn't get there until, what, 2000?
Yeah, we think we initiated in 2000.
Yeah, we were fairly late to that issue. But I'm with you, too. I remember loving his sermons, and I couldn't tell you about one of them right now.
I can remember one. Well, I mean, I can't remember enough of it. I wish I could hold on to it. But the one I really remember was the right to choose to die. Mm-hmm. That was profound. And he cited as kind of his starting point a couple who in their mid-80s, somewhere west of us, I think in the state of Virginia, had made this. Mm-hmm. They knew that dementia was taking over, and they made a kind of, I don't think I should call it a suicide pact, but in a way, the two of them just made that decision, and that they would do it. And he said, we shouldn't have to do that. I mean, people shouldn't have to do it that way. And that was from there.
I think a great example of his patience and his modesty, I think I found out maybe the last year that he was here that his doctoral dissertation was about the theological basis to support same-sex marriage.
Exactly.
And this was, this is a guy who sat up here for 12 years waiting for us to be ready to do O&A.
Oh, I was struck by that too. When that came out as he was departing, practically, I think, because I don't even think he told us when it was the O&A. It was when he was retiring
it was at the very
came
end,
out. Yeah. And I went, oh my gosh, how could I be so ignorant? He must have, revealed this at some point when I was away. I must have missed it.
Nope, I don't think so.
And then a couple years, since COVID and Brian Payne is back in person, I heard him say, we were so amazed that it came out when Vern was leaving. And I wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd been a member of Riverside Church in New York City when William Sloane Coffin was a senior minister. And after leaving that church and coming down here, it wasn't until I came to this church and heard Vern that I heard sermons that were on the same level as his. And again, I can't remember a specific one, but I just remember they were all good.
This is slightly off topic, but one of my joys is, if you remember back in 2008, there was financial crisis, and Vern had announced his retirement. Mm. And I think it was Ann Holmes who heard he was going to look for another job. And I said, if he's going to look for a job, we've got to talk him into staying here. And I got to go and talk with him I was moderator at the time, and say, okay, Vern, if you're looking for someplace else, you got to just stay here. And he agreed to serve another 2 years.
I heard I wasn't a part of any of, the rest of the conversation in the church, but just independently, I heard he was a little concerned that all of a sudden investments had really tanked, and he was a little concerned. I said to him, I know, I was out there kind of at the corner on the narthex, and I said, well, you can just stay here. And he said, oh, I can't do that. I said, yes, you can, please. Please, just don't retire.
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember how it happened, but I feel like I was responsible for the 2-year idea.
See, I thought I was.
He said,
I'm sorry to have missed all that conversation.
Well, and we were so happy, right? We were so happy that both he and Jenna agreed to stay.
Mm-hmm.
for me, it still cast a little shadow. It's like, oh my gosh, but it's going to come soon, and I don't want it to come anytime soon.
It's always hard going through those changes, but you all have been steadfast through a lot. I know, speaking about you brought up the women's group when you were first joining, and I know you talked a little bit about in the early days of the church. I think there was a question about whether women would be deacons.
Yes.
Dottie.
Bunny, do you remember you and I were in the first group of women that were ordained as deacons? I do not remember who else
That's right, I'd forgot.
was there, but you and I were. So that was quite an event for me personally, but also quite an event, for the church. But it raised some issues, and Hugh was the one that told me this. The reason the church had to install the carpet in the chancel and on the steps and the main carpet going down the main aisle was because of the ladies' high heels. They were making noise on the floor. And also, they were creating divots in the floor in the chancel. And so,
Well, I can talk to that too, because Ron Craven, and he was quite a military man. And at one deacon's meeting, he said, "You women with those high heels, and we cannot have it coming down the aisle here. So we're going to put a carpet here. And you can wear any kind of shoe you want, but we're not going to have any more clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack." And he went on and on and on. And I said to him later, "Well, it wasn't that bad, was it, Ron?" "Oh, yes, it was, Bunny." It's just, so anyway, yeah.
Well, I have another Ron Craven story that might as well, since you gave. In the early 80s, I think we sponsored one family or helped, anyway, someone who helped sponsor an immigrant family was very active in the church. And I was chair I was chair of Board of Missions. At that time, the outreach programs were divided
What is
into
the separate,
domestic and overseas. And so I was chair of the Board of Missions. And so at the annual meeting in January 1984, I was presenting a plan that we are going to sponsor another immigrant family. And it was to be a family from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, we had a name. I can't remember much about the external supporting services, but there was a family with 3 young boys. And so I needed to present this at the annual meeting. And I was sitting there at the table and saying, "No, this is what we need to do, and this is what we'd like to do. We need your approval." So Ron Craven told me afterwards that this was not fair. Here we are on the heels of Christmas, and I am 8 months pregnant with Sarah, and how could we possibly say no to my presenting sponsor a family? So. Yes, we did indeed sponsor a family, and actually I had very little to do with it that first year when Sarah was a newborn. So, but Ron Craven was the one who reached me with that.
Another funny story about Ron, it was when we had used the beautiful silver set for communion and had them on the ends here. And of course, all those little cups had to be filled. And there's something with a long stem on it that you can pour them quite fast. Well, anyway, Ron had us practicing how we would fill the little cups, and then how we would carry them in and how we would pass them down to the people and all of this. And of course, being a military guy, he wanted it just like this, and he would demonstrate. That was what was so funny. He would demonstrate that. He says, okay, now here we go. And he would make us come in and rehearse before we went out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beck was
And he was a
very,
wonderful guy. I mean, you couldn't help but love him, but it was so funny, all this.
He had quite a sense of humor in
Yep.
spite of
Yeah.
what it might sound like.
With that first class of women deacons, Beck held a class for us, and we had to practice. All the deacons would be up in the chancel, and at a particular moment, we all would rise in unison. We would come forward to a specific mark in the wood in the chancel, and then we would turn and start down the aisle to serve communion. And I'm going to, Ron was very particular, yes. My youngest daughter had knee highs, and by the time she got to church, they'd be down around her ankles somewhere. And Ron was head usher, and he would look at her and he'd say, "Pull up your socks." But the other thing I wanted to, he was head usher. Herb was also one of the team members. And Sunday mornings for the ushers, we had to fold the bulletins and put in any of the inserts that there were. So it was quite a process. But at that point, there were no women ushers until one Sunday, Herb was short an usher. And, nobody had showed up. And finally Herb said, "Well, you can do it." And I said, No, I can't usher. And he said, "Yes, you can. You come to church every Sunday, you see it, you know how to do it." So reluctantly, I rather agreed that, okay, I'll do this. Unfortunately, it was the winter, and I had some knee-high boots, and I was clunking down but yes, I was the first female usher, and the roof stayed on. And since then, there have been many, many female ushers, but
I'm curious about when you started as a deacon, were your responsibilities equal to the responsibilities that the men had?
yes, they were.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just checking.
Another memory that doesn't follow right now, but for a long time, we had folding metal chairs in the sanctuary. So these very nice pews in their sections, we had nothing like that was in here yet. And so, a classic old metal chair. And can't say it looked very pretty. Was flexible. Took a lot of work, of course, to move all those individual chairs around, but it was a flexible space, as it is today. But I remember that the air conditioning would be pretty potent, and summer clothing, especially women's summer clothing, being what it is, summer was hard here because I was so cold. I was freezing in these metal chairs, 360 degrees. I was cold.
And didn't the sanctuary originally just have a concrete floor?
I wasn't here in that time.
No, no.
The wood was added late after
Yeah.
I started coming.
No, no, no,
This is
the
additional
carpet
flooring.
was.
This is
This is
additional.
flooring.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I thought I'd heard in the early days that with the folding chairs, it was also just plain concrete.
I don't think so. I don't think it was
Okay.
quite that
Probably
ugly.
linoleum tile, I think.
Okay.
That's it. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
you're right.
Because that was there
That's it.
when I started coming, and then,
It's probably still there.
yeah, it's underneath the wood.
But
I'd
the
forgotten all
linoleum was.
about that flooring. Yeah.
The one memory I wanted to be sure to share was the addition of the atrium. When this building was built, the intention was to have a sanctuary in the woods, behind, so that this was the back
This was
of
the
the
back.
back of the church here. And people went in and out, it was at the time the back door. And it looked it got very seedy. There was an orange folding door that got off its railings, so it didn't quite, and there was a Coke machine. Do you remember, Lois?
Wasn't that in the, you're talking in the social hall, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm
I don't
talking about
remember
coming in.
I remember the orange sliding between.
Well, there was
social hall and
there were two
choir,
of them. There
but I
was,
don't remember this other one.
and it was around the library.
Yes.
It was a, and
See,
the
the
kids.
library was in the corner.
Yes, and the kids
Back there.
like to hang out there,
Yeah.
and that's why the Coke machine was there. Well, we felt there was a need to have a capital campaign and hired an outside consultant. And the outside consultant interviewed probably 20 people and couldn't figure out what we wanted. And finally, we had one of our members who was a fundraiser, Rob Peters, was asked to take over. And he interviewed people and said, what people want is an entrance to the church that is welcoming. We don't want to feel like we're always going in the back door. We want it to look welcoming as they come. And also there was a desire, if you remember, you couldn't walk all the way around the church. You could go down the hallway and it was dark and dank, and also you could go to the Sunday school wing, but you had to go back and forth through this middle thing. And so part of the feeling was, could we make it so you could walk all the way around the church? And that was a major addition. Now, a couple of the people wanted more Sunday school rooms, so we ended up with the panel that goes from this Sunday school wing over to where the kitchen is, and built 2 rooms there for Sunday school that are now rooms 7 and 8.
7 and 8.
And then there was a room underneath that we didn't have enough money to finish off, which became
The Jubilee room,
The
yeah.
Jubilee room, the Welcome
Yeah.
Center later. But I thought it was quite remarkable to try to figure out what is it that you wanted, and it was to feel welcoming. And I think the architect for the addition did an amazing job, because you don't realize that that's the addition, using the sloped roof the same way, using the stone that's throughout the church, and then adding skylights in this hallway so that walking down the hallway.
Well, it was not like a tunnel.
Exactly.
It was
And so,
dark.
but it obviously, and I know we're thinking of capital campaigns, and to me, it's clear it takes a lot of thought and reflection, just as you were doing with the Jubilee room. It takes a while to come up with what all is it that you need.
I'm always reminded of, I was on a search committee once, and we were writing the profile, and we'd each take turns reading drafts, and I saw something in there that said, "You'll love this place, it's such a beautiful building." And my reaction was, huh? It's functional. There's nothing beautiful about this church. Not a thing. Sorry.
I never thought of it as the back door exactly, although I knew that this dream of having a larger sanctuary when our
Right.
membership grew out to the east. But it was a very ugly, basic entrance, flat roof, and for sure. And then to comment, it was such a relief. I think it was after my time that was relevant to me, that to make that circulation that around the box of the building, because it was such a traffic jam to go down the Sunday school wing because there's a lot of parents and a lot of kids at that time, and people were trying to go both directions. And then to get to the social hall, of course, you had to come back here, down the hall again. So, oh my goodness, that was a brilliant change.
Well, and to piggyback on what you were saying earlier, Bunny, the nursery was in the basement.
Yes.
And part of the thought was parents aren't going to feel comfortable putting their kids down the basement. So part of the redesign in that addition was to move
Yep.
the nursery upstairs.
And that
be
was
accessible.
quite a thing, too.
Accessible. And we built it so that there was a door straight out of that nursery. You could throw all the kids in a special crib. There was a metal heavy-duty crib that you could just push it outside. So quite a bit of effort went into planning that nursery room because, as I say, you could pack all the kids in one crib and whisk them out the door if you needed to.
Well, this is not on that same subject, but years ago, we had this wonderful ladies' tea, and we had the tables set up in the entrance out here, and everybody wore hats, and we had tea, and it was so much fun. I've got some pictures that I really should put up someplace because it's wonderful. It was just wonderful. And Dee Cardiff, bless her heart, she just made it so. And then her husband came, and he was dressed as a maitre d', and he went around and poured the tea or brought you more cookies or whatever it was. So that was a lovely time that we had out there.
Well, thank you so much. These memories that you've shared today have been really meaningful and interesting for someone who came after you all. It's so fascinating to hear about what the history's been. So on behalf of the people working on our anniversary, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you for making the arrangements.